regular co-hosting the show with Monica Henderson for MinkLife Motivation. I'm also known as the Soul Luminaire Lighting the Path. And today we have a very special guest. Karen Fullerton is here. She's a speaker, author, and energy healer. And we're just going to get together and have a very real conversation about something spiritual. What we do is we pick some kind of topic out of a list and see what it is and decide how we're incorporating that in our life, how we're integrating, and what we might find challenging about that. So we're just getting real with the spiritual. There's no jargon here. We're just having fun, and let's see where it takes us.
Okay, so right before we pressed record, we did the dun da da da, and the topic of the day is study of sacred texts. So
All right.
Right. We just never know. So that's the topic. I got goosebumps when I said it. So I feel like this is probably the right conversation at the right time right now. And so the study of sacred text, I'm assuming we're going to kind of lump all of the sacred text in this conversation. So more traditionally, or more, I guess, mainstream sacred texts would be the Bible or the Quran or the Torah or, ancient scrolls. So we're going to have that conversation. And the question that I always ask is for you, and we're going to start with our guest, Karen, today. Do you use sacred texts in your spiritual practice?
When that came up, I went, oh no, because I always share, even though I started with a Catholic background as a kid from my parents, I always say I don't remember the Bible. Like I remember stories. So no, I can't quote, I don't reference the Bible. I don't reference like Psalm numbers or words or anything. So I'm like, oh no, what is this going to bring? But then, of course, intuition, or I was guided that sacred text for me is just the written word. And so when I started my spiritual journey, I went to authors and, read things that from, I guess, would be considered more new age, or from like when Doreen Virtue was a part of it and her angel information, or conversations with God, or Mary Magdalene stuff. So to me, that means a little bit different. And as an author now, I like to consider not only myself, but anybody who writes is a sacred text, because I believe it's just spiritual information being guided and shared with people who need it, which really is what I think sacred text in its foundation really is meant to do, to comfort and to guide people.
Yes. Love that. See, you never know where you're going to be guided in these conversations. I love it. Jennifer, what about you?
Yeah, I can't say that there's any that I particularly go to all the time and like be religious about it, right? For me, I've encountered a lot of different sacred texts, and I really like what Karen shared actually about anything that's written and that speaks to us and inspires us is really a sacred text, something that we take to heart, and can put into practice and really resonate with, or even give us new ways of thinking about it. So there's a lot that's done that for me. I've read a lot of like inspirational, spiritually based books. I've also, when I think of sacred texts, you had mentioned scrolls. I remembered when I was in Nepal and I was studying Buddhism at a monastery, and then we went over to a different monastery. It's like we snuck over there. It was a really weird thing, like to sneak to another monastery. But there was a monk there and like his protege, and they had this huge skeleton key. And and it was like something out of the movies, right? Like it was an archway, ancient door, and they had this large key that they're trying to open up. They're knocking to make sure the spirits aren't in there, but we did eventually get in there. It took us a while. It was just really funny thinking about that. But it was really, because it's like satirical in the sacred sense too. But once we're in there, there's like thousands of years old scrolls of the Dharma and written in Sanskrit, and just being in the energy, even though I couldn't read a thing, we definitely couldn't touch them, but just being in that energy just felt so reverent and spiritual, and just it was like I was absorbing it in some way. So just being surrounded in all this sacred text. And then when I was studying in Indonesia, it was the Vedas, right? And so going through that and the Upanishads, and then um, yeah, like you, Karen, growing up, it was the Bible, and I never really took to that myself because I didn't find it very sacred. Like to me, it was like really fear-based, and there was a lot of information that just didn't resonate with me in there, and I also found it very confusing.
Mhm.
And so that didn't work for me at all. So it's interesting to think about, like, what are the sacred texts? How were they used in the past? How are they used now? How is it being used in your life, Monica?
Yeah, for me, I always say when the student is ready, the teacher appears, right? And I kind of feel like um, my home language, right? Like, so my home spiritual language was Christianity, and we were like extremely conservative Christians. And so we did like 4 days in church. Like, I do know the Bible backwards and forwards and forwards and backwards. I can probably still recite the books of the Bible in order because it was drilled in us in that way.
Mm.
Um, and so I came from a very like really hardcore kind of Christianity background. And so I do actually know a lot of the stories and scriptures and things of that sort because it was drilled in. And when I was about 18, so my mom gave us kind of the keys to the kingdom when we were 12, and she's like, your job with your spirituality, uh, I'm supposed to teach you what I know until you're 12, and then after that, it's your job to build a relationship with your creator on your own, and you need to do the search, and you need to do the work to kind of build that relationship. And so Christianity and the way that it was being indoctrinated in me at the time just didn't feel organic to, like, it wasn't my soul's language, right? It was the language that I was brought up in, but it didn't feel like the language that I needed to hear, that I needed to speak. And so I did like what any poor broke college student would do. I went into Borders bookstore and I sat in the religion section and I read the books and then put them back on the shelf because I couldn't afford to buy any of them. And I did this kind of like tour day religion on those sacred texts and realized that, well, they're all kind of saying the same thing, right? Like they're all essentially like what they're trying to achieve, right, with this sacred text conversation is less about the specifics of like this particular story and how these facts are historical and this is exactly how it went down and you have to follow this to a T. But essentially what they were all asking us to do is to live in extreme respect. And I say extreme because I think most of us don't we say we respect things, but do we really respect, right? Like, do we really kind of have that like respectful relationship with everything? Um, and what I was hearing from all of these different texts was really about the respect of, if God is in everything, how would you treat it, right? Like, so if God is in this computer, how would I treat it? If God is in this pen, how would I treat it? If God was in the person that I'm talking to, how would I treat it? If God was in the trees, in the grass, and all of the things around us, how would you treat it? And if you can treat it with the respect and reverence and the sacred kind of bond that you have with your creator, then you would be kind of in the right place always, right? Like you'd be in the right mind frame always. And so that for a long time was like my own kind of like belief system, right? And I didn't really have any texts that spoke to that. And then when I went on a date once. I thought I was cute, and I was like, I like this guy. He's so cute. And we were talking about religion, and he was like, oh, well, I don't really subscribe to religion, but if I do subscribe to a religion, or the closest thing to a religion that I was subscribed to is this place called Agape, which I know you've had some experience with Agape. It's kind of like a new age spiritual non-denominational center. And so I went to that date, and that was when I found my soul's language, right? Which was kind of like a compilation of all of those texts. And their bookstore became my sacred bookstore, right? Because there was so many different ways that I could engage with texts, and it wasn't just the Bible. But the funniest part is the more I engaged with the other texts, the more I understood the Bible better, right? The more I understood what the intentions were behind it, the more I was able to interpret it better. And so my sacred text journey kind of was like all over the place. And in the end, I was able to kind of like pull it all together and realize that it's more like this. I get to be a nomad in all of these sacred texts. I get to kind of like pick up customs and languages and thought processes from all of them without having to feel like I'm beholden to any of them. And for a long time, I was saying that I'm an ambassador for God, and I just get to go to all the different countries and all the different places
Yes.
and kind of have this exchange and not have to feel like I need to be a citizen of that particular thought processing. So that's kind of my little like how sacred texts are a part of my spirituality. Now I find God everywhere. So from a post on Facebook to a where someone just kind of puts a very really cool thought, pensive thought for me to kind of like reflect inward on, or kind of like having storybooks, like fictional stories that kind of like remind me of my spirituality and remind me of my connection to everything around me and that deeper respect that I found. So
I'd love to. Can I comment on?
yes, absolutely.
Okay. So there are a few things that I'll say pinged me. It's like ooh when you get excited, and just like you said, it wasn't your language. Things didn't resonate, and when we talk about the Bible, Jonathan, was a little too confusing, but I really feel, and the more I go along, where we fight a lot, or you hear about, oh, you have to read this, or you have to read this. And the more I realize, like you said, there is no right or wrong, because true to the word that I use in my business, Spiral Up, we are all on a different level of that spiral. And so it's not right or wrong, it's what resonates with you and what your past is, and when you're ready to go out and find your own, because not everything is portrayed. Just because it's in writing doesn't mean it's exactly how it happened, right?
Yeah.
We're human. And I've been told, even don't remember where I heard this, but it makes sense in here, that even the 10 commandments from Moses were watered down because it had to resonate with the people of the time. It couldn't be what the highest frequency elevation of God's message. It had to be brought to the level of consciousness of
Yeah.
humanity at that time. And then even with books, I live in Florida, and I don't get involved in politics really on purpose, but our governor, is sanctioning books and rewriting history where teachers can't talk about slavery at all, or white men owning. I mean, it's so, how humanity and just time, as we go on, things get lost, things get rewritten. Even there are parts of the original letters or Bibles from women that are nowhere to be found
Right.
from times of that. So I believe what you did in finding your own path and finding your own language is really what we're all meant to do. And just like poetry, you can read a poem and everyone can resonate differently with that word, or have an idea of what that could be about, because it is a little cryptic. You have to
Mhm.
use your imagination. And I feel like that is what we're meant to do with what we read. How does it resonate in here, not in here, or out of dogma
Mhm.
or fear based? Because to me, if we're talking spirituality, it's all love.
Right.
So if you're doing something out of fear, to me that is out of alignment. You have to find your way back into the love, into the spirituality. And if you have fear based reasons you're reading something or doing um, something based on a sacred text, I would invite curiosity with that.
Mhm.
That's just me. That's what I did. So I just wanted to share that. So hopefully readers, um, I don't know, might get some comfort out of that.
Yeah, I do think the point the po- I I've said on many episodes of this so far, the point of spirituality is not for you to be some God walking on earth, but it's more for us to be able to know what to do when we have to cope with life happening, right? Like know how to move forward and to keep going and to be encouraged and to stay in it when life is lifing, when life is actually happening, right? And life is really easy when it's going well, right? When you have everything you need to eat, when all your bills are paid, when everybody in your life is happy and content and you're able to engage with them and you're happy and content. Super easy, right? It's the hard part is when we are challenged by like the circumstances of our life, and we need to get back to that place of hope or joy, or I always say the undercurrent of joy, when we need to really tap back into that. And I feel like because of the religiosity of everything, right? And I think I just made up that word. I don't know if it's a word or not, but that
I
whole
would
like
write that down.
religious, right? The religiousness of it all. It's less about kind of like why I am, what is the purpose of me learning this, and what is the purpose of me practicing this, right? The spiritual practice is so that I can cope with the emotions that are going to come with life. And that is kind of like what it distills down to, which is why if you can find inspiration in something that isn't necessarily a religious text, right, but an inspiration to keep moving forward, or an inspiration to move past this moment, this temporary feeling that you have at the moment, then that thing does become a spiritual text. Jennifer, now that you're stationary, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I'm interested because I'm thinking about not all sacred texts are text. I have a really strong kinship with Native spirituality, for example, and the indigenous teachings and how they differ from nation to nation, but the core teachings are there. And I love how, like Karen was talking about, how I feel around that, how I connect to that, what resonates for me, what speaks to me and helps me decide who I want to be, how I want to be, and be able to live my life in a respectful way, in a connected way, in a spiritual way. And so most of those traditions and teachings are given orally, right? There's
Mm,
storytellers that go from place to place, and they're hosted, and I remember sitting around elders and just listening to the teaching. So it wasn't that we were studying or reading any particular text, but we were listening to the stories and the teachings in the oral tradition. And then there's a lot of ceremony that goes on as well. And so the study, like there's like this unwritten teachings or rules or guidelines for being in the world and connecting with it that aren't necessarily written. They're practiced or they're shared in stories. And so I find that really fascinating too, that there's different ways of the spiritual or sacred teachings are passed on, with each other. And I think in the storyteller sense, that I love, that idea of sitting around. I didn't really grow up with grandparents or elders where I got to sit around and listen to stories, about even our own ancestry and what the beliefs were, and how they grew up. And so I love the story times, and I love the analogies and the metaphors and the connection, because we're all sitting there together in circle, and it's intergenerational. And I find that a really sacred time to be able to do that or participate in ceremony and practice those ways of being. So yeah, I find that really interesting. The topic just spurs all of these ideas and memories and experiences. And yeah, so there's different ways of incorporating those teachings in our life, I think.
yeah.
And you spoke on storytelling, which is exactly how I remember the Bible, to go back to how we started.
Mm.
I remember stories just like Jesus, would be a storyteller. And I pull that into what I do now as a speaker. I will admit, I also am a teacher in higher education, and I had a business background in March. So I'm very type A factual on one side, but when I'm speaking and connecting with people, and writing is stories that connect with people. It's always the stories because you feel it. And so I so align with you with that, Jennifer, is that storytelling is, and listening to stories, you can remember things better and you can pull it into your own life better. I love that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
One of the stories that I use a lot in my kind of consulting and supporting entrepreneurs um, is the story where I forget who the character is at the moment, at this very second, I can't remember his name, where he had to sacrifice his son, right? And so he had to like walk him to this cliff and he had to lay his son down on the altar. And he went up to actually do the sacrifice, but like really pained by it, like extremely pained by the fact that he had to walk his his child to this sacrifice, and he goes up to sacrifice it, and right at that moment the lamb comes out of the bush and he doesn't have to sacrifice his son. He can now sacrifice this lamb, and life is great. And that's a really crappy story, right? Like, as is, like, why would you like encourage murder of your child? Like, why would this be the thing? But what I love about that is that storytelling can actually help me explain to someone, like, listen, sometimes what you have to do is really hard and it feels like you're cutting your nose off for your face, right? Especially as an entrepreneur, there's a lot of things we have to do, like not quit our job, but like not quit the business that we're building to just go get a job and feel the security. Sometimes we have to walk right up to the edge of danger where we feel like we're going to lose everything, and almost always the universe meets us right there at that moment, right? And it just so happens that a client comes through at that time, or, you know, your needs are satisfied in some miraculous way. But the only way you were ever going to get there is if you went right up to the altar, if you went right up to that very point in which you have been fearful of and scared of and like running from, to actually see or receive that need that you had. And so even now still use some of those stories uh, as beautiful illustrations, not necessarily as literal interpretations of what was happening at the time.
Well, that sacrifice to me is surrender
Mm-hmm.
in newer times, and really surrendering our control. That's a lot of, especially women,
Mm-hmm.
who had to fight and control over generations to get what they needed. They wanted to set boundaries to be, their authentic selves. It's hard to release control. And
Mm-hmm.
I believe, like, your sacrifice, okay, I'm sacrificing my son in today's terms is, okay, I'm surrendering. And I will share one story that I had right before I got married. I was engaged. I was living with my in-laws at the time for 6 months in between. Don't have to go into that whole story. I had left my job, couldn't find a job. I felt smothered. And I went on this interview, and it was already 2 months after the interview. And I remember taking a shower. I had no clothes on. I was in my room at the time, and I was sobbing. I was crying. And I remember like this, like, total surrender. Like, oh, I don't know what to do. God, just help me, whatever way that is. I just remember this feeling. And I joke not, 5 seconds later, so still had no clothes on, my phone rang and I got a job offer from that uh, one I went on 2 months ago. So I had to sound happy. I'm like, okay, and so to me that was a lesson. It
Yeah.
was a very much intended. And people say, oh, that's coincidence. Well, no, I literally surrendered to, like, okay, what is it that you want me to do? And then something came up.
Yeah.
So I love that you brought that up, that surrender. And
Yeah.
yeah.
So, okay, so we're wrapping up and we're at the end, and I know you have a hard stop really soon here. So, the last question, I guess, to finish this conversation or to close the conversation is, what's one tip or one advice that you have for someone when they are trying to include sacred text in their spiritual practice?
Me first?
Yes, you first.
Again, so whatever text into your practice, we read to increase our knowledge and increase our thinking to connect to spirituality. So the tip, I also use one word, is integration. Remember to integrate your mind, your thinking, your education with everything else, not just spiritual, your emotions, your body, and spiritual. That it needs to integrate. So as you read something, check in. How does that make me feel? Do I feel closer to the divine or my beliefs? And start to really ask yourself questions and integrate and find the balance within yourself and your energy, because I truly believe that our emotions are our spirit's language. So even as we educate ourselves in mindfulness and text to bring in knowledge, it all goes back to how do we feel about that? What do we have to learn to bring us closer to God, source, universe, whatever resonates with you?
Love that. Love that. Jennifer, did you have a final tip?
Yeah, you know what? I really love reading something inspirational every morning. I always reach over, there's some book that I'm into that inspires me. And I also like cosmic energy, so I read the Cosmic Energy Report as well. But I also want to give the tip that sometimes it's your own words, your own affirmations, your own guiding principles. That's something I also practice. I read what I've written as like an affirmation or intention or sankalpa for the day. And just even reading that's sacred text, that's a way of incorporating that. So just get inspired. And sometimes that's even through your own words.
Yeah. And I guess my final tip would be to don't forget that the practice is for real life, but also in real life, go back to your practice, right? So the reason why we try to do things on a regular basis, right? We're told to go to Bible studies or to sacred ceremonies or to read your scripture every day or however it's been said to you. Is so that you can practice for when you actually are going through something, that you continue that activity. Regardless of whether it's a good day or a bad day, regardless of whether or not you are on cloud nine and everything is great or things are crap and everything in between, try to maintain your practice all the way through. The whole point is for this to be able to help you ride the waves so that you can tap into your undercurrent of joy. So with that, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much, Karen, for being
Yeah.
on and having this
Yes.
Can I
conversation.
Thank you,
make a
Karen.
shameless plug or just to show something since we're talking about texts?
Yes, absolutely.
Quick.
I was actually going to give you an opportunity to give us a shameless plug. So go
Well,
for it.
I just, I had it on my desk. I'm like, ooh, we're talking about text. So this is self-published. I did a children's picture book, and it's
Wow.
about a spider. So we don't often, think of spiders as like your children book worthy. But why I say bring this up with sacred, it's about teaching self-worth.
Mm.
Um, and it's yellow because of the yellow chakra and our self-worth. So something like this, and like you mentioned, in everything you do, find what is, if this were God, how would I treat this book? So everything we do and every lesson, even my goal is to help children. Um, I do say I lean toward little girls. My whole platform is helping women, just because we have so much more to go through and more generational uh, trauma and things to heal in our life. But that something like this could be a text that could be sacred between you and a child to help them know their self-worth. So that goes back to the teachings and the storytelling. It's through
Mhm.
storytelling. So
Yes.
anyway, I just wanted to share that. It's available. It's called Clara's Conundrum. I have all my links on my website, which is just my name. And if anyone's interested too, they can reach out that way or find it on Amazon. But
Yeah.
Yes. I
Well,
love it, Karen.
we will
Thank you
add
for
all
doing
of
that.
those links in the show notes so that people
thank
can access
you.
it. This has been a fantastic conversation, right, Jennifer? Is there anything else that
Oh,
we
yeah.
need to say?
I always just say free your spirit to direct the life that you're meant to live.
Love that. Well, with
Thank
that,
you so much for allowing me to be a guest. This was
no,
wonderful.
no problem. This has been Getting Real with the Spiritual. And don't forget, if you love this and you want to do our meetup, we will be accompanying this every Friday at 1 p.m. Pacific time, a meetup where we can actually talk about what you did that week and exchange ideas so that we can continue to keep it real in our spirituality. With that, this has been our show. We'll see you next time.
Bye.